I never thought I'd be that kind of woman. You know the type, the ones who sneak around behind their husband's back, making up lies about working late or going to fictitious book clubs. But life has a way of surprising you, and not always in good ways. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 8 years I was just another waitress at Jerry's Diner off Highway in Detroit. I married Tom right out of high school, when he was starting his career as a truck driver, and I was still dreaming of maybe going to community college someday. We bought a small house in a working-class neighborhood where most folks worked in factories or retail, just trying to make ends meet. Tom's job kept him on the road for weeks at a time. At first, I didn't mind the solitude. I'd work my shifts at the diner, watch TV in the evenings, and wait for his calls. But slowly, the empty house started feeling more like a prison than a home. The silence would creep in around midnight, when I'd lie awake in our bed, listening to the distant rumble of trains and wondering where Tom was parking his truck that night. Everything changed when the Andersons moved in next door in April 2022. The house had been empty for months after old Mrs. Peterson passed away, and seeing moving trucks pull up that spring morning gave me something new to focus on. I was hanging laundry in the backyard when I first met Mike Anderson. "Hope you don't mind some noise for a few days," he called over the fence, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Got a lot of furniture to move in." I remember thinking how different he looked from Tom. Where my husband was tall and broad-shouldered, Mike was lean and wiry, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. He had kind eyes, the sort that crinkle at the corners when he smiled. "Don't worry about it," I said, trying to sound neighborly. "It'll be nice having people next door again." His wife Jenny came out then, carrying a box marked kitchen. She was pretty in a practical way, with her blonde hair pulled back in a sensible ponytail and minimal makeup. She worked at Target, she told me later that week when she came over to borrow some sugar. The four of us fell into an easy friendship those first few months. When Tom was home, we'd have barbecues in our backyard, the kind where the men stand around the grill discussing sports while the women sit at the picnic table sharing gossip about the neighborhood. When Tom was away, Jenny and I would sometimes watch reality TV together, sharing a bottle of cheap wine and complaining about our jobs. But there were also the moments, small at first, barely noticeable, when Mike and I would find ourselves alone. Maybe I'd be watering my flowers and he'd be checking his mail. Or I'd run into him at the corner store when I was picking up milk. Just casual encounters between neighbors, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. The first real crack in my marriage's foundation appeared during that hot July. Tom had been home for a rare 2-week stretch, but instead of feeling closer, we seemed to keep missing each other somehow. He'd sleep late while I worked the morning shift, then sit up watching TV while I tried to sleep. When we did talk, it was about bills or house repairs, or his next route schedule. One evening, I was sitting on our front porch steps, trying to catch some breeze in the suffocating Detroit summer heat. Mike came over holding 2 beers. "Looked like you could use one," he said, handing me a bottle. "Jenny's at her sister's tonight, helping with the new baby." I should have said no. Should have made an excuse about needing to start dinner for Tom. But Tom was inside, absorbed in a baseball game, and the beer was cold. And Mike's company felt easy in a way things hadn't felt easy in a long time. We talked about nothing important: work, the weather, the neighborhood gossip. He told me about growing up in Flint, about dropping out of community college to help support his mom when she got sick. I told him about my own dreams of going to school, now gathering dust like the community college brochures hidden in my bedside drawer. "It's not too late, you know," he said, looking at me with those kind eyes. "To go back to school, I mean." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "Try telling that to our bank account. Besides, Tom says we're doing fine as we are. Is that what you want, though?" To be fine as you are, the question hung in the humid evening air. Before I could answer, Tom's voice called from inside, asking about dinner. Mike stood up quickly, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. Though we were just talking. That night, lying next to Tom in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Mike's question. Was I fine with how things were? The truth was, I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly happy, truly alive. Life had become a series of routines. Wake up, work, watch TV, sleep, repeat. Even sex with Tom had become mechanical, when it happened at all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sticky heat and growing tension. Tom left for another long haul, and I found myself looking for reasons to be outside. When Mike got home from his factory shift, we'd talk across the fence, conversations growing longer each time. I started wearing my nicer shorts, the ones that showed off my legs. He started finding excuses to come over, borrowing tools, asking advice about what to get Jenny for her birthday. Then came the evening that changed everything. Jenny was working a late shift at Target, and I'd just gotten home from a double at the diner. Mike knocked on my door, holding a casserole. "Jenny made too much," he said. "Thought you might be hungry after your long day." I invited him in because that's what neighbors do. We sat at my kitchen table, sharing the casserole and talking. He told me about troubles with Jenny, how they barely talked anymore, how she seemed more interested in her phone than in him. I found myself sharing similar frustrations about Tom. I don't remember who moved first. One minute we were talking, and the next his hand was on mine across the table. The touch sent electricity through my body, waking up parts of me that had been dormant for so long. "Sarah," he whispered, and the way he said my name made me shiver. We shouldn't, but we did. That first kiss was desperate, hungry, nothing like the perfunctory pecks Tom and I exchanged when he left for his routes. Mike's hands were everywhere, and mine were too, and somehow we ended up on my couch, crossing a line I'd always sworn I never would. Afterwards, the guilt hit me like a physical blow. Mike left quickly, both of us avoiding eye contact, muttering awkward apologies. I took the longest shower of my life, trying to wash away what we'd done, but the memory of his touch lingered on my skin. The next few days were torture. I'd see Mike leaving for work in the morning, or hear him in his backyard, and my stomach would twist with a combination of shame and desire. We tried to avoid each other, but in our small houses with their postage stamp yards, it was impossible. A week after it happened, I ran into him at the corner store. We stood in the snack aisle, pretending to be fascinated by different brands of chips. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice low. We met that night at the park 2 blocks over, sitting in his car like teenagers. The conversation started with "we can't do this again," and ended with his hands in my hair and my lipstick on his collar. And so began the dance of deception. We were careful at first, almost paranoid. Our meetings were sporadic and hurried, quick encounters in his car during my lunch breaks, stolen moments when Jenny was at her weekly yoga class. We communicated through a messaging app I'd downloaded specifically for him, always deleting our conversations immediately. The guilt was always there, a constant companion. Every time Jenny brought me leftovers or invited me over for coffee, I felt like the worst person in the world. And Tom, God, Tom trusted me completely. He'd call from the road telling me he missed me, and I'd agree while sitting in Mike's embrace. But the thrill of it all was intoxicating. With Mike I felt young again, desired, alive. He looked at me the way Tom used to, back when we were teenagers and everything was new. We'd talk for hours about our dreams, our fears, the lives we wished we had. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Summer turned to fall, and our affair deepened. We got bolder, taking more risks. Sometimes he'd come over after his shift, and we'd spend hours in my bed, talking and making love until we had to rush to get dressed before Jenny got home. Once we even met at a motel off the highway, spending a whole afternoon pretending we were different people with different lives. It was bound to fall apart eventually. Looking back, I'm amazed we managed to keep it secret for as long as we did, nearly 5 months of stolen moments and careful lies. The unraveling began on a cold November evening, when Jenny showed up at my door unexpectedly, her eyes red from crying. "I think Mike's cheating on me," she said, collapsing onto my couch, the same couch where her husband and I had first crossed the line. My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it. "What makes you think that?" I managed to ask, handing her a tissue. "He's different lately, distant, always on his phone but hiding it when I come near, working late shifts that don't show up on his paycheck." She looked at me with such trust, such vulnerability. "Sarah, you're my best friend. Have you noticed anything?" I shook my head, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. That night I messaged Mike, "We need to stop. This isn't right." He agreed, of course. We both knew it had gone too far. But knowing something and doing something about it are two very different things. 3 days later, we were back in each other's arms, promising it would be the last time, a promise we'd break again and again. December brought snow and Tom home for the holidays. Having him around constantly made it harder to see Mike, but somehow that only intensified things when we did manage to meet. The risk of discovery added an extra thrill, though I hate myself now for thinking that way. Everything finally imploded 2 days after Christmas. Tom had gone to visit his brother in Toledo, and Mike came over. We were so caught up in each other that we didn't hear Jenny's car pull up. She'd come to return a casserole dish she'd borrowed, using the spare key I'd given her months ago for emergencies. The look on her face when she found us in the bedroom, I'll never forget it as long as I live. She didn't scream or cry. She just stood there staring, then turned and walked out. The sound of her cars starting and driving away seemed deafening in the silence she left behind. I should go after her, Mike said, frantically pulling on his clothes. And say what? I asked, but he was already gone. I sat on my bed, still wrapped in sheets that smelled of guilt and betrayal, and waited for my world to collapse. It didn't take long. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with messages from mutual friends. By evening, Tom was calling, his voice breaking as he asked if it was true. I couldn't lie anymore. The truth poured out of me, not just about the affair, but about everything. How lonely I'd been, how disconnected we'd become, how I'd felt like I was disappearing into the role of truck driver's wife, with nothing left of myself. I could have handled you being unhappy, Tom said, his voice flat and tired. I could have handled you wanting a divorce. But this? Finding out from Jenny's sister? Having everyone in the neighborhood know before me? I trusted you, Sarah. The aftermath was brutal. Tom came home the next day, packed his things, and moved in with his brother. Jenny filed for divorce within a week. Mike and I barely spoke. What was there to say? We'd destroyed 2 marriages and multiple friendships for what? A few months of excitement? The neighborhood, which had once felt like home, became hostile territory. Women who'd been my friends for years crossed the street to avoid me. I heard whispers at the diner, homewrecker, slut, all the words society reserves for women who break the rules. Nobody seemed interested in Mike's role in it all. He was just another man who couldn't keep it in his pants. I was the villain of the story. January brought divorce papers and loneliness so deep it felt physical. I'd drive past Mike and Jenny's house, now empty with a for sale sign in the yard, and remember all the summer evenings we'd spent on their deck, the 4 of us laughing and drinking beer before I'd ruined everything. One night, about 3 months after it all fell apart, Mike showed up at my door. He looked terrible. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot. Jenny's moving to Chicago, he said. Got a job at corporate Target, and I miss you, Sarah. For a moment I was tempted. The attraction was still there, humming between us like a live wire. But something had changed. Maybe it was seeing the devastation we'd caused. Or maybe I'd finally grown up enough to understand that passion without respect, for others and ourselves, is just destruction in disguise. Go home, Mike, I said. We've done enough damage. He nodded, understanding in his eyes, and that was the last time I saw him. He moved to Grand Rapids a few weeks later, and I heard through the grapevine that he'd started working at a different factory there. Tom and I finalized our divorce in May. He was fair about it, more than fair really, given what I'd done. We sold the house and split the proceeds. He kept his truck and his retirement account. I kept my car and what little savings we had. I moved to a small apartment across town and finally enrolled in community college, taking night classes in business administration while still working at the diner. It wasn't the fresh start I dreamed of during those heady days with Mike, but it was a start nonetheless. Sometimes, on quiet nights when sleep won't come, I think about how differently things might have turned out if I'd just been honest from the beginning. If I'd told Tom how lonely and unfulfilled I felt, if I'd insisted on couples counseling, if I'd worked harder to save my marriage instead of looking for escape in someone else's arms. But life doesn't work that way. You can't change the past, you can only learn from it. And I've learned plenty. About honesty, about responsibility, about the difference between love and infatuation, about how the excitement of forbidden romance pales in comparison to the weight of carrying secrets and lies. It's been 2 years now since everything fell apart. I'm in my final semester at community college, maintaining a GPA while working full-time. The diner promoted me to manager last fall. Turns out I have a knack for business after all. The other waitresses who used to whisper about me now come to me for advice about schedules and inventory. Tom got remarried last summer to a kindergarten teacher he met through his sister. I saw the pictures on Facebook. They looked happy, and surprisingly that made me happy too. He deserved someone who could be content with the life he had to offer. Someone who wouldn't seek excitement in all the wrong places. Jenny's doing well in Chicago, according to mutual friends who still keep in touch with her. She's engaged to a lawyer and expecting her first child. I sent her a letter once, trying to apologize, but it came back unopened. I can't blame her for that. As for Mike, I heard he got back together with his college girlfriend in Grand Rapids. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about those months we spent together, if he regrets them as much as I do. Not because the feelings weren't real, they were all too real, but because of the cost. The trust we broke, the lives we upended, the friendships we destroyed. I'm dating again, cautiously. His name is David, and he teaches high school English. We met at a coffee shop where I study between classes. He knows about my past. I made sure to tell him early on. We all have chapters we wish we could rewrite, he said. What matters is the story we're writing now. The hardest lesson I've learned through all of this is that there's no such thing as that kind of woman. We're all capable of making terrible choices when we're unhappy enough, lonely enough, desperate enough for change. The line between right and wrong isn't as clear as we'd like to think, and crossing it happens in small steps, not giant leaps. But I've also learned that redemption is possible. Not the kind that erases what you've done. Nothing can do that. But the kind that lets you build something new from the ashes of what you've burned. It's slower than an affair, less exciting than stolen kisses and secret meetings, but it's real and solid and true. Last week, I was closing up the diner when a truck driver came in, looking so much like Tom used to after a long haul, tired eyes, wrinkled shirt. That particular kind of loneliness that comes from too many miles on empty roads. His wife called while he was eating his burger, and I could hear the love in his voice as he told her he'd be home soon. I wanted to tell him to cherish that love, to nurture it, to never take it for granted. I wanted to tell his wife to speak up if she's unhappy, to fight for her marriage before looking for escape hatches. But it wasn't my place. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, through your own mistakes and regrets. So instead, I just refilled his coffee, gave him an extra slice of pie on the house, and silently wished them both better choices than I had made. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes, try to be better, and hope that somewhere along the way, we find the kind of love that's worth being faithful to.